in 1948, when he gave as a series of lectures what turned out to be the nucleus of his remarkable book, The Structure of Complex Words. He was himself a student of I.A. Richards, and I take delicious pride in that august academic genealogy. Mr. Empson had first concentrated in mathematics as a Cambridge undergraduate, and shifted to English in his senior year when he came under Professor Richards' supervision. Professor Richards has written of him that he seemed at the time to have read the whole of English poetry so recently and so carefully that their roles were in some danger of becoming reversed. However literally we are to take that statement, it is an established fact that during that 1 year, and indeed in a few months of that year, he wrote the main body of 7 types of ambiguity. That astonishing volume was composed with such ardor and haste that in the second edition Mr. Empson acknowledged that some of his quotations had regrettably been inaccurate because they had been quoted from memory. That memory, though fallible, is prodigious. I remember his telling me that when he was teaching at the University of Peking and the city was besieged by the forces of Chiang Kai-shek, the students and faculty were obliged, along with the rest of the city, to retreat to the hills, taking with them only what was absolutely essential for survival, which did not include textbooks. For 3 months in the hills, he taught English 17th century poetry from memory, only to discover on the return trip to the city after the siege was lifted that one of his students had with him a copy of the Oxford Book of 17th century verse, but with traditional Chinese courtesy did not offer it to his teacher for fear of suggesting that the entire contents had not been committed to memory as a matter of course. However, he is here today not as a critic or a teacher, but as a poet. And it may be said that in England, at least, at the time much of his best-known poetry was composed, poets like Sorrows came not as single spies, but in battalions, or at least in schools like Fish. Though his influence as a poet has been remarkable both in England and in this country, and Empsonian has become a descriptive and critical term in regard to poetry, his work is still singular and astonishing in a way of no other poet. His poems, if I may venture a timid generalization about them, are richly laden with puns and puzzles, dense syntactical compressions, and a casual offhand manner. But more centrally, they are concerned with a sort of double vision, or with the discomfort and absurdity of a simplistic moral or mental life, which seems to be the lot of many thoughtful men, that we are obliged to live in more than one realm, human and divine, active and meditative, escapist and responsible, has been a continuing theme of a poet whose work has a quality often of lightheartedness presented as a barricade against desperation and profound sadness. His gaiety is at work under terrible pressures. It is with great pleasure that I introduce William Empson.
It makes too much noise. It is too cathedral. Can you turn down the cathedral just a little?
I can get it farther away from me. He's got it on wrong. Or go farther down. That should be better.
Ingo, it is a little splendid. I'd better be careful, I think. Well, I hope the contingent from the concert have come on now. I think they probably have. We'll leave the door open anyway. Well, this is a splendid hall, but with this powerful machine, which I must try not to abuse, I think the voice ought to carry sufficiently. The introduction was extremely splendid, but of course it really was fantasy. There was no siege of Peking by Chiang Kai-shek. It was the other way around. It was the Japanese attack on the country which sent Aubade into the far west of China, and it was there where all my Chinese colleagues readily knew their lectures by heart. They were merely surprised to find that a white man had the bare competence to know his lectures sufficiently well. Do you see, it was they, in their generous way, praised me highly for being able to do what they were all doing. I could not plume myself on that a great deal, I must say. But it's true about the bootleg anthology. I think he was rather a pig not to hand in his anthology. But however, I am not alarmed by this. I think that my errors would probably be improvements at various points. But I never checked up. I do not know whether I made disastrous errors. But in having these things typed out, which I was lecturing about, you see, of course, you can only do that to poetry. You can't do it to prose. I mean, nobody knows a novel by heart. It would positively be, when you come to think of it, there would be something the matter with the novel if you recited it, I think. Well, I always feel it generous of audiences to want to hear this poetry, which is really so long ago in my life. It corresponds, you will see, to early Auden, the wonderful poet W.H. Auden was born in the same year as me, and Spender and Leavis and Louis MacNeice were as it were, his group in students in Oxford. But I was at Cambridge. I was outside this movement, and they, if you remember, they did left-wing poetry in the early 30s and so on, and all through the 30s in a kind of boyish way, jeering at you. If you wouldn't see, you're rotting away, don't you know? You're going to be sunk next moment unless you pull yourself together and join us. And this has been jeered at by later purists, saying it is a very bad way it is not a literary way to write. Well, it was at that time. It wouldn't be now, but at that time it was very powerful propaganda and very effective propaganda. And you must remember that what they were saying from the 30s on, at least as the public mind understood it, and as they understood it probably, was essentially you need to join a world, a European lineup against Hitler, the Popular Front as it's called, and you abroad and at home you need more socialism. You need to avoid the effects of the world slump, which, as you'll remember, began in 1929, and this kind of poetry began with it, really. The point I want to make clear is that by 41, after 10 years, practically the whole country agreed with them. Do you see? It was clear that ought to have been done, and in fact was being done. Well, now it's a very good situation for a poet to be saying things which sound very rough, but his whole country agrees with them 10 years later. And that good fortune they have. But it was really a matter of inventing a means of doing it, this process of jollying along in a Boy Scout manner. I hadn't got, you see, because I was at the wrong institution. I never had this trick. And I wish I had done. I had exactly the same opinions, I hope that is clear. And what this went with, but I do think it's very absurd of them to have nearly all except Louis MacNeice, appeared in a white sheet after the war was won, saying it was awfully wicked of us to have been in favour of the Popular Front. How bitterly ashamed we were of having said this. Well, I think that's peculiarly absurd, as a matter of fact. No doubt Stalin had behaved very badly, but it wasn't their fault at all. Nobody thought it was. I never saw there was any. I still regretted not having been in on this movement, you see. And I've sometimes been praised for being too sensible to join them. Well, I merely didn't know how to do it. I think that frequently needs to be explained in literary critics doing literary history, you know. They think that the authors are very much more intellectually planned than they are. Well, take Dylan Thomas, for heaven's sake, who was a great deal more politically left-wing and determinedly so, but never put it in his poetry at all. That wasn't what he was good at writing poetry about, you see. It didn't appear in his poetry, practically speaking. I hope you won't deduce my opinions from the kind of poetry I wrote. But we all had two great influences brought to bear. The influence of T.S. Eliot, of course, was very strong, but they would have been there anyway, compared to the kind of final decay of Victorian poetry. You had two things to admire and imitate. Either the 17th century John Donne, people like that, or the metaphysical poets, or the French symbolists, Baudelaire, Mallarmé, Verlaine, I suppose. Well, the truth is you can't do both at once, you see. Mallarmé would consider it frightfully vulgar to argue in poetry, positively low class, whereas Donne is arguing all the time. That is how he does it. And you cannot really both take both these attitudes together. And they found different ways to get around this problem. Mind you, I'm not saying that you can't write symbolist poetry. That would be very silly. During this century, since 1900, there have been very few, but some tremendous poems written in the symbolist method. It would be absurd to deny. But I think that for young people nowadays writing poetry, it has become an incubus. The glad message that all poetry does not have to be symbolist, I feel that I'm bringing like a gospel, but it ought to be very obvious in a way, but it frequently needs someone to say it. I, you see, was only imitating the English metaphysicals. I wasn't imitating the symbolists at all. They too, like the way of dealing with politics, they simply hadn't impinged on me. I was cloistered, you see. Didn't know how to do this, and I do think that they're a narrow form, and you're bound to feel this. I feel you should first be presented with this. I'm sorry to be so tiresome, but I feel that I'm addressing a intellectual type of audience, and I will try to pick on the what you might call the theoretically interesting points, or even the theoretically interesting points, do you see, for this piece. And so I should begin with one called Legal Fiction. A slight poem in a way, and in those days, in the London New Statesman, a left-wing weekly magazine, you had a lady called Sagittarius who wrote exactly this kind of thing. She wrote witty comparisons in tidy rhyming verse, which drove home the socialist policies of the magazine, do you see? And really, why is this not one? Why is it not a poem by Sagittarius? I think it's rather hard to say. I do think it's though her work was quite all right. This breathes a larger air, I would claim that, but I don't know how I could prove it to you. It's what the legal fiction is that the if you own a piece of land, I'll write you own the earth beneath in a cone which goes to the center of the earth, and above that you own the space above to the forever, to the galaxies. And one thing, this early poetry of mine was frequently saying, these things, of course, no longer apply to the individual landowner. He has been got round. But the same things apply to the nation state and are equally upsetting. And I do claim for this poem. I was approached by a group of American international lawyers who were doing a brochure about space travel. And they paid me $5 only, I regret to say, on the immensely glossy brochure to print this poem at the start. Not, of course, because they thought it beautiful, they thought it was funny, do you see? And I should explain it really did go on when I was a child. My father owned a certain amount of land in Yorkshire, and one of his, when he became elderly, one of his worries was that some of the coal mines 5 miles away were burrowing under his land. They were stealing from him, do you see? And it was impossible to prove this. You couldn't get at the plans of the workings of the coal mines, so it was a great worry to him, but a very sort of ineffective one. I don't think it was ever cleared up at all. But above was far more active. General Pitt Rivers, one of that great family of archaeologists and explorers, do you see, in his estate in Wiltshire, he shot down, this was before the First World War, but just before, he shot down a government aeroplane over his land, and he was his elephant gun, do you see? Naturally, he was equipped for this purpose. And in those days, you had only to puncture the petrol tank. Of course, it was all made of canvas and glue and stuff. And he killed the pilot, you see. And he was tried for murder at the grand jury at Winchester. And he was let off. There was no further trial after that. The grand jury let him off on the ground that the man was trespassing, do you see? And well, you had to change the law quickly before the First World War came. Clearly, the Parliament had to attend to this. But really, the position of the individual landowner was altered in my lifetime in this very decisive way. However, I was saying that the point of this brochure was for stratosphere flying, do you see, what are the rates of the nation state, which is crossed by an aeroplane very high up. And I don't know what conclusion they arrived at or ever did, but when I was in communist Japan, or Japan just before the communist victory, the students were much in sympathy anyway with the invaders, with the other side. I would sometimes be asked to show my pieces after I had praised the poet Auden in his earlier works. I would show this, and it would prove that my heart was in the right place. Do you see? Now, this kind of metaphysical poetry, fossily intellectual poetry, has sometimes been accused of writing only to please myself, which was the theory of Robert Graves, that the poet writes to poetry to stop himself from going mad. He oughtn't to think about the audience, do you see? It's his duty to write for himself alone, or perhaps for his private friends. Well, now, the number of poems which satisfy both American international lawyers and Chinese communist students is not very large. It is fair enough to say that even if it prevented me from going mad, it served a larger purpose. I think that there's certainly... However, there's much too much about this. I am, as it were, trying to lay down the position. I won't go on talking so much again, I promise. This is called legal fiction. Law makes long spokes of the short stakes of men. Your well-fenced out real estate of mind, no high flat of the nomad citizen looks over or train leaves behind. Your rights extend undone above your claim, without bound. You own land in heaven and hell. Your part of earth's surface and mass the same. Of all cosmos volume, and all stars as well. Your rights reach down where all owners meet, in hell's pointed exclusive conclave at earth's center. Your spun farm's root still on that axis dwells, and up through galaxies a growing sector. You are nomad yet. The lighthouse beam you earn flashes like Lucifer through the firmament. Earth's axis varies. Your dark central cone wavers, a candle's shadow at the end. And the end, of course, means you can't take it with you. It envisages the man's death as well as the geometrical point of the end of the cone. But this, I think, you are allowed to do. At least Donne frequently does it in his poems. The pretense of the comparison is kept up rigidly until the last line, where it can be thrown away as a bang. So I felt that I was imitating quite exactly there. I would like also to read a rather bad poem, really, called Camping Out, just 2 verses, which I've become rather keen in my old age to say that what we all thought about Donne in the 20s is the truth. I mean, about his early love poetry, it is insisting that the young couple are, in a sense, Adam and Eve. They are, each of them is Adam and Eve. They are what civilization is based upon, do you see? And so each of them is has a kind of mysterious position, like the Logos, and the universe has to echo them. I think that Donne's love poetry regularly means this, but it is fiercely denied. It has been denied since 1931. And so I rather want to produce a poem which shows that I really did think that when I was a child, before I realized that there was a quarrel about it, do you see? Well, it's 2 verses, of which the second, I think, can be said, but the first is too clumsy. It is... the 2 children are camping together, do you see, and of course this is a way to get away from your parents and your landladies and so on, and she is now cleaning her teeth, and this is regarded with exultation by the young man, and the specks of the toothpaste into the lake echo the stars above, which are invisible as they are in fog at the moment, but they copy the universe. They set a pattern for the universe. Do you see? This is where it could be called metaphysical and slightly like Donne. That is the first verse. But then in the second verse, the effect of this, the way soap works, you understand, is to lower the surface tension so that the bits of dirt are removed more easily. And so, if you look at these specks, as soon as they lie there, they expand all in proportion exactly as if you were approaching a constellation at enormous speed. And if you did that, I and all my contemporaries were reading a number of very good popular scientists, Eddington and J.B.S. Haldane and so on. And as all the other students had read this, they didn't regard it as puzzling at all, do you see? But it isn't a remote learned reading I was relying upon. I was relying upon the reading universal to my friends and contemporaries. However, that is why we were quite familiar with the idea that if you went faster than light, you would destroy the whole of the universe. The universe indeed depends upon the young couple. That is not upon one, but upon all. I'm sorry if I rub this in tacitly, but such is the only point of an otherwise you might think flippant poem. It's called Camping Out. And now she cleans her teeth into the lake, and gives it God's grace for her own bounty's sake, what morning's pale and the crisp mist debars. Its glass of the divine that will could break restores beyond nature. All lets heaven take itself being dimmed her pattern, who half awake nooks between rocks, a straddled sky of stars. Soaked tension the star pattern magnifies. Smooth limned honor through assumes the skies, whose vaults are open to receive the Lord. No, it is we soaring explore galaxies. Light's bullet boat, our bullet's boat, light speed by thousands flies. Who moves so among stars their frame unties? See where they blur and die and are outsawed. Well, it only just comes off, I think, with a good deal of sympathy from the reader, but still there it is. It has a point, all right. I would like to do this last pen, which is, I've always felt uneasy about this poem. I think it's a splendid, well, I feel it's a lyrical invention, but it is merely the meter of the Cromwell by Andrew Marvell. It is this short couplet, but after the long one. But it is hard to use. I thought I'd managed to use it. This is why I like reading it out, really. But of course, you must remember it is a student poem, and the love poems are all very much boy is afraid of girl. And this poem is almost stock boy is afraid of girl. We could make a go of it by if we kept our faces straight, if we adopted the right role. Well, among young people, it's no use telling me that Oscar Wilde was an old pig. I expect he was always pretending to be something else. But among young people, you see, if you have to decide whether you want to be a doctor, you have to be able to imagine how would you, whether you would like being a doctor or not. Otherwise, you fall into great mess of your life. It is there is a certain kind of truth in in this doctrine of you first adopt a pretense and then it becomes real. And I didn't think I was imitating Oscar Wilde, but I agree I didn't really know what I was talking about enough. However, after this apology, I think the poem demands no more. The fathers, of course, were the early theologians who said that the greatest pain for the damned was to know what it would be like to be in heaven and know that they were not there. And the boy is afraid of girl line of all my early love poetry is the boy thinks he can't get that. Do you think? This last pen for the damned the fathers found They knew the bliss with which they were not crowned. Such, but on earth, let me foretell, is all of heaven or of hell. Man, as the prying housemaid of the cell, may know her happiness by eye to hole. He is safe. The key is lost. He knows door will not open nor hole close. What is conceivable can happen too, said Wittgenstein, who had not dreamt of you. But wisely, if we worked it along, we should forget where it was wrong. Those thorns are crowns which, woven into knots, crackle under and soon boil fools' pots. And no man's watching, wise and long, would ever stab them into song. Thorns burn to a consistent ash, like man, a splendid cleanser for the frying pan. And those who leap from pan to fire should this brave opposite admire. All those large dreams by which men long live well are magic lanterned on the smoke of hell. This then is real, I have implied, a painted small transparent slide. These the inventive may hand paint at leisure, or most emporia would stock our measure. And feasting in their dappled shade, we should forget how they were made. Feign then what's by a decent tact believed, and act that state is only so conceived, and build an edifice of form where house, and build an edifice of form for house where phantoms may keep warm. Imagine then thy miracle with me, ambiguous gifts as what God's give must be, what could not possibly be thou, and learn a style from a despair. Not really very good, I think, but it's true enough, as a matter of fact. But well, now I wanted to read one called "Homage to the British Museum" because this, again, I think has a certain theoretical interest. I was allowed to do my stuff on the telly in England a few years ago, and this poem really is about a statue in the ethnological section. It's a South Sea Island thing, and very queerly they do the supreme god by making an extremely blank object, looking like the absolute, and sticking the local gods, or the gods of this and that, are just stuck onto it here and there. It's a remarkable effort of mind, I think, for primitive people. I think it's very surprising. However, we have in Sheffield, England, where I was teaching, a process called the Practical Criticism paper, which was invented by I.A. Richards, in which it is, except that it is practically what they call the unseen in the old Latin paper, you know. They are given a poem which they have not seen before and are asked to criticize it while writing the exam. And I don't believe you do this here. I hope you do. But the trouble with it is, I think we always found, is people who are good at doing this really are frightfully good. But a lot of people who are quite good enough can't do it, you see, not under examination conditions. I think that is the trouble with it, regarded as a technique for examination. Good thing to teach anyway. However, the children, one of my colleagues, very maliciously, I think, put in this poem and told them to criticize it, and so I had to mark the results, and the children were very severe. They said that I produced no clear image, and also that the poem was pessimistic. Well, pessimistic, I do deny. There is a little bang at the end, you see, saying that this god rules all over the museum, but it doesn't rule the world outside, which I do think sort of admits It removes pessimism from the poem. But as to imagism, I think that when they say, I can't give a clear image, that is quite true. When you had it on the telly, they didn't give it nearly enough. You need to turn the thing over and over and show it. Of course, the words, what I say is quite true, but I can't tell you what this thing looks like. It looks astonishing. Of course, you can't imagine it from what I tell you. The whole theory of imagism, I do think, is basically wrong. It presumes that when somebody mentions the sea, let us say Andrew Marvell saying that the mind is like the sea, the mind, that ocean where each kind does straight its own resemblance finds, and so forth. What you do when you hear the sea is you switch on a little picture postcard of a wave which you have always ready in your mind, and that is the sea, do you see? Well, you ought to be thinking about the human mind, not about the sea. Anyhow, you ought to be using the sea as a means of thinking about the human mind. And as the sea does a remarkable number of different things, this little picture postcard is a great nuisance to you. You will have to push it out of the way before you can get anywhere with it, do you see? So the whole idea that you think by images really is, and really, if you went to the psychology department, they would assure you that this piece of nonsense was refuted 100 years ago, but not in the common mind. It has indeed been a piece of popular thinking ever since Aristotle, and you would find with the Japanese theorists who have reflected on the subject, they all talk about images too. Well, that is merely because the human mind, when primitive, is extremely regular, do you see? Well, now, I ought not to go on teasing you about these theoretical matters, but I thought it raised a point. However, I do show you in my poetry, as Matthew Arnold wrote to his mother, the merit of my poetry is to be literal and sincere, do you see? And there really is such a thing in the British Museum. There is a supreme God in the ethnological section, a hollow toad shape faced with a blank shield. He needs his belly to include the pantheon, which is inserted through a hole behind. At the navel, at the points formerly stressed, at the organs of sense, lice glue themselves, dolls, local deities. His smooth wood creeps with all the creeds of the world. Attending there, let us absorb the cultures of nations and dissolve into our judgment all their codes. Then, being clogged with a natural hesitation, people are continually asking one the way out, let us stand here and admit that we have no road. Being everything, let us admit that is to be something, or give ourselves the benefit of the doubt. Let us offer our pinch of dust all to this God, and grant his reign over the entire building. I thought I might read Doctrinal Point in this room, which I never read anywhere else. It is really what they used to be called deism, you know. It is saying that if you reach the status of, well, I don't know, deism, would they have said that? It is a thing which many medieval mystics would have said, but it's saying that if you arrive at the point of grace, granting that you accept the concept of its difficulty in a state of grace, you no longer require a personal God. You are, as it were, living like that, as the flowers do, and a little good it does them. They die very rapidly, just the same, but they are untroubled, you see, and the mystery of the conception of being in a state of grace, which is no credit to yourself. It merely means that you have no the problems which arise for most of humanity no longer arise. It is that is what is being considered, though one can hardly say discussed, in this poem, and dragging in Eddington and so on is really did not seem to my first readers to be off the point at all. I'm afraid it still does slightly willful, but I think it's all right. I'll read it out. It is called Doctrinal Point. The God approached, dissolves into the air. Magnolias, for instance, when in bud, are right in doing anything they can think of. Free by predestination in the blood, saved by their own sap shed for themselves, their texture can impose their architecture. Their sapient matter is always already informed. Do you know, I'm wearing the wrong spectacles for the first time. I find I've got to be able to read the text. Their texture can impose their architecture. Their sapient matter is always already informed. Whether they burgeon massed wax flames, or flare plump spaced-out saints in their gross prime at brow, or leave the sooted branches bare to sag at tip from a soul blossom bower, they know no act that will not make them fair. Professor Eddington, with the same insolence, called all physics one tautology. If you describe things with the right tensors, all law becomes the fact that they can be described with them. This is the assumption of the description. The duality of choice becomes the singularity of existence, the effort of virtue, the unconsciousness of foreknowledge. That overall that Solomon should wear gives these no cope who cannot know of care. They have no gap to spare, that they should share the rare calyx we stare at in despair. They have no other that they should compare. Their arch of promise, the wide heaviside layer, they rise above a vault into the air. The heaviside layer, of course, is what keeps us safe from the wrong wavelengths of the sun, you understand. They are, in a sense, protected. And I wanted to read a poem of the same kind called Four Legs, Two Legs, Three Legs, which is about the Sphinx legend. You see, I had been peeping at the Sphinx coming back from Japan. This was written about 1935, and it does kind of report about the Sphinx. It really does. You can dimly see the paint which Napoleon dressed it up in when he conquered Egypt as part of his campaigns. So you mustn't suppose that it isn't true. Again, you see this odd bit of information, fairly irrelevant, is part of it. And of course, the Egyptian Sphinx has nothing to do with the thing of the same name, the mysterious demigod who put the question to Oedipus. But I don't know. Why should you not say that this Sphinx is still there? And the Sphinx was clearly not destroyed by Oedipus answering the riddle. The poem is called Four Legs, Three Legs, Two Legs, and the question was of the Sphinx to Oedipus, what animal has four legs when young, two legs when middle-aged, and three legs when over? When old, the old man has a stick, and the child walks on four. So he just said man, and of course then you have Freud and all that. What you would say about man? It is a pure case of as it were, reflecting about the strangeness of life, and so much of metaphysical poetry is reflecting about the strangeness of life. I think this is slightly pointless in a way, but I thought I could try that. He killed his father, as he was fated to do, at a road where a place where three roads met. One from Delphi, the mysticism and prophecy and so on. One from Thebes, which was considered awfully rustic and countrified and simple life. And one from Corinth, which was the glory of the world, where the Corinthian column came from, do you see? And so all human experience was, in a way, called in. Such is what the lead-in means. I don't think it needs explaining otherwise. Delphic and Theban and Corinthian, 3 lines by the odd chance, met at a point, the delta zero, the case trivial, a young man's crossroad, but a shady one. Killing a mistaken black cat in the dark, he had no other metaphysical trait. God walks in a mysterious way, neither delighteth he in any man's legs. The wrecked girl, still raddled with Napoleon's paint, nose eaten by a less clear conqueror, still orientated to the average dawn, behind Sahara, before Nile and man, a toy abandoned, sure after so many that the next sun will take her for a walk, still lifts a touching dog's face, eager for a sign. Not one for generalizing his solutions, Oedipus placed the riddle with a name. Another triumph for the commonplace. While too much to pretend she fell and burst, it is a triumph, it is a comfort that the Sphinx took such an answer. Well, that came in a later volume, in just after the Second World War had begun, called The Gathering Storm. And my later poetry, I do think, was a great deal about which included that, was a great deal about the feeling that the Second World War was sure to come, do you see. And I do think that it seems remote to many people now who would naturally feel, if you get another war, it'll be far more dangerous. Why were you so bothered about that one? Well, the present rulers who control the atom bomb are, I think we can feel fairly safe in that they're afraid of it. They don't want to let it go. But Hitler was known to have said that he wanted to have the Second World War before he was too old to enjoy it properly. Do you see? Well, against that, the position seems fairly hopeless. Do you see? So the idea that it was sure to come was knocking about from the Japanese capture of Manchuria, which, funny enough, in 1934 was felt to show that the methods of control by the League of Nations were no use. And I should read my poem about the Aubade, about which was done just at that time, and appears to be about the threat of an earthquake, which you often get in Tokyo, do you see, and you then wait wondering if you're going to get one of the big earthquakes afterwards. And the doubt about whether you go into the garden arises because the Japanese have very heavy tiles on the roof, which usually hold the roof through the earthquake. But if they come off, if the house collapses, they crush you, and if they come off sideways, they may hit you in the garden. So whether you're safer in the garden or in the house has been greatly discussed, do you see, among experts on earthquakes, and that is all that is meant by the suggesting going into the garden. I don't think it needs explaining otherwise, except that you may say, why does this this rather casual love affair have anything to do with the prospect of a world war? Well, it really did. If you were a young Englishman coming to teach in Japan early in the 1930s, the wise old Englishman, leader of the colony, would at once tell you, don't marry a Japanese lady because the two countries will be at war within 10 years. Do you see? So that is I'm afraid that if the poem seems obscure there, it is only because it is far away and long ago. The connection is meant to be obvious, in fact. Hours before, the Aubade, of course, was a poem sung to, I think, usually to married couples after the wedding night. But anyway, it's a poem sung at dawn. Hours before dawn, we were woken by the quake. My house was on a cliff. The thing could take bookloads off shelves, break bottles in a row. Then the long pause, and then the bigger shake. It seemed the best thing to be up and go. And far too large for my feet to step by, I hoped that various buildings were brought low. The heart of standing is you cannot fly. It seemed quite safe till she got up and dressed. The guarded tourist makes the guide the test. Then I said at the garden, laughing she said no. Taxi for her and for me healthy rest. It seemed the best thing to be up and go. The language problem, but you have to try. Some solid ground for lying could she show. The heart of standing is you cannot fly. None of these deaths were her point at all. The thing was that being woken he would bawl, and finding her not in earshot he would know. I tried saying half an hour to pay this call. It seemed the best thing to be up and go. I slept, and blank as that I would yet lie, till you have seen what a threat holds below. The heart of standing is you cannot fly. Tell me again about Europe and her pains. Who was tortured by the drought, who by the rains? Glut me with floods where only the swine can row. Who cuts his throat and let him count his gains? It seemed the best thing to be up and go. A bedshift flight to a far eastern sky. Only the same war on a stronger tow. The heart of standing is you cannot fly. Tell me more quickly what I lost by this, or tell me with less drama what they miss who call no dire God for a good throw, who say after two aliens had one kiss, it seemed the best thing to be up and go. But as to risings, I can tell you why. It is on contradiction that they grow. It seemed the best thing to be up and go. Up was the heartening and the strong reply. The heart of standing is you cannot fly. Well, I would like to do one of the direct war poems, Reflection from Rochester, which is once the friend of Charles II, he wrote an essay on man, this satire on man, this Lord Rochester, and he was complaining about dueling. That is, a grand man had to carry a sword and be willing to fight duels if he was offended or affronted, which no longer applies really to individuals, but it does apply to the nation state, and it's being compared. So what he said was about the animals who fight for quite sensible reasons. For hunger or for love they bite and tear, but wretched man is still in arms for fear. Fearing he arms, and is in arms afraid, from fear to fear successively betrayed. And it's a tetzerima. It, as it were, it expands this into modern terms. Is all it tries to do. It's very brief. It's called Reflection from Rochester. From fear to fear, successively betrayed, by making risks to give a cause for fear, feeling safe with causes and from birth afraid, by climbing higher not to look down, by mere destruction of the accustomed, because strange, too complex without system, or too clear, by needing change, but not too great a change, and therefore a new fear. Man has achieved all the advantage of a wider range. Successfully has the first fear deceived, thought the wheels run on sleepers. This is not the law of nature, it has been believed. Increasing power, it has increased a lot, embarrasses attempted suicides, narrows their margin. Policies that got virility from war get much besides. The mind, as well in mining as in gas, war's parallel, now less easily decides on a good root confusion to amass much safety from irrelevant despair. Mere change in numbers made the process crass. We now turn blank eyes for a pattern there, where first the race of armament was made, where a less involute compulsion played. For hunger or for love they bite and tear. Well, I should read a villanelle called Missing Dates, which is more widely accepted than anything else I've written, and I think probably is the best poem. It is. I should explain that villanelles. I think that James Joyce described himself in The Portrait of the Artist, writing a villanelle, and this, I think, made all the poets of my generation try to write villanelles. It seemed a kind of test, but we all took it into our heads that each time, it's a very rigid form, invented by the Italians, who apparently just thought it was musical. I don't think you'll find them struggling with the form. Nor, of course, to the poets of the 90s, like Dobson, who wrote villanelles. They just regard the repetitions as musical. But we felt that every time the line is repeated, it has to mean something different, you see, and treated like that, it becomes very hard to write. Of course, anybody can push together the repetitions, and it feels dead, and making it come to life is I do think, hard. But there was the best of them, I think I should say, was written by W.H. Auden in the Sea and the Mirror, when all the characters in Shakespeare come out and talk about themselves. All the characters in Shakespeare's Tempest, I mean. And Miranda comes out and panting, do you see, completely astonished by the world. She has never seen men except the monster and her father before. Oh, brave new world, she is saying, and she is perfectly sensible, really, but at the moment quite overwhelmed. And what she talks is a perfect villanelle, and this is an astounding piece of technical skill. I do think he's a wonderful technician. And I remember pointing this out to Louis MacNeice when it first appeared, and he was rather cross and said, of course it isn't a villanelle, it may remind you of villanelles, but it couldn't be one. But it is literally a villanelle. I don't know if I ever succeeded in. However, my villanelles sound very stiff, and they sound rather like tombstones, but they are intended to in a way. I should say what I always wish to say, that what this says is untrue, and in writing it, I felt this is a wonderful subject for a poem, but it never occurred to me to think whether it is true or not. It's a very odd thing that in poetry you can do that. I think it is. I don't think it's bad because it's untrue. It says that if you lead an entirely tidy life, always arriving at the office at 9 o'clock and picking up the pins from the carpet as you go to your desk, then you will never grow old. Well, you will, as a matter of fact, just the same. It's rather a good thing, as a matter of fact. But the theory is, what the poem says is that you won't. And I think this was what I.A. Richards meant long ago when it was new, when I sent him an early copy, by saying that it was a joke. The last verse is meant to be, in a remote way, is meant to sound facetious. Well, this is very mysterious. You know, Max Brod, who was a close friend of Kafka, describes how he had only, in writing the trial, he had only written the first 4 verses, but one evening he read them to his young friends, and they were all in fits of laughter. They thought the trial was overwhelmingly funny. Well, I suppose they thought it was, they were regarding it as satire on government officials, do you see, and in that political way it would seem funny, but if the trial is funny, I'm very willing to believe that my little poem is funny too, but it's fairly remote, I should say. However, it is a very sympathetic comment, I think. I wish it was funny. I should explain about the Chinese tombs. Perhaps it was very often said when I was young that the Chinese, owing to their reverence for their ancestors, were choking up the farmland of the country. It was being covered by tombs, do you see. Well, this wasn't so. If you went and looked at it, the father's tomb would be there in full, but grandfather's tomb would be cut in half, and all the others would be only smidgens, do you see. Well, this is clearly a working arrangement. It was not, in fact, choking the farmland of the country, but it was widely believed. It could be used as a belief. It's called Missing Dates. Slowly the poison, the whole bloodstream fills. It is not the effort nor the failure tires. The waste remains and kills. It is not your system or clear sight that mills down small to the consequence of life requires. Slowly the poison, the whole bloodstream fills. They bled an old dog dry, yet the exchange rills of young dog blood gave but a month's desires. The waste remains and kills. It is the Chinese tombs and the slag hills usurp the soil, and not the soil retires. Slowly the poison, the whole bloodstream fills. Not to have fire is to be a skin that shrills. The complete fire is death. From partial fires, the waste remains, and kills. It is the poems you have lost, the ills from missing dates at which the heart expires. Slowly the poison, the whole bloodstream fills. The waste remains and kills. Well then, I wanted to do, out of respect for this audience, so I'm afraid it may be a painful experience in a way, to recite the poem Bacchus, which is this process. It took me a long time to write, and is this alembication carried too far. It's quite a short poem, and it's, well, Dylan Thomas used to describe it as my good poem. He thought it was the only one that had come off. So I must respect his judgment there. I think I ought to read it to you. But it is, it takes some sympathy to listen to. It is about drink, you understand. a mythological process of distilling spirits is going on till nearly the end of the poem, which is historically quite wrong. You understand, the classical gods, in classical times they had no distillation. They had wine, but not whiskey and so on. But the modern world, one of the first great triumphs of industrial chemistry was making gin, do you see? And considering the modern world, you naturally put the classical gods to work making spirits. But to the process of distillation, of heating up the vegetables, so that the gas of alcohol comes over and is then sharply cooled when it comes across, so that you get it in a more concentrated form. Of course, the water comes over too, but less rapidly. That is the process of distillation. And in the first verse, the god of wine is looking after, Bacchus is looking after the whole affair. In the second verse, Neptune, or Noah, the sea god, is in control of the bubbling liquid, you see, which is being boiled up so that it comes over as steam. And this comparison to political affairs is going on all the time, you'll see, that is the point of it. This is the agitator, the inventor of a new political scheme, no doubt. But he acts by agitating at random. It is only by shaking to pieces the old thing that the new scheme can be brought into operation. So a boiling and bubbling at random is going on, and a sufficient exciting by unreasonable means a belief in the new scheme is the way it is established. It then may become real when people believe in it, you see. So that verse is about Neptune or Noah. The third one is about the fire underneath, which makes the liquid bubble. It is about Prometheus, who brought fire from heaven. And this is the, politically, this is the, regarded as drunks, do you see, this is the man starting to get drunk who feels both braver and stronger and wittier. He is, as it were, willing to start a new world. The second one is the political idealist he's very unwilling, really, to enter the world he is dealing with. Fire has been brought down from heaven and has to be applied to the world, and he falls into agony when he realizes what is going on. But never mind, he is necessary to make the process go on. And the third god is Mercury, who represents the thermometer. He is put there to control it. He has self-consciousness, do you see. The progress of the drunk goes to nervous breakdown, a neurotic condition of some kind, neurotic self-consciousness in a way, the mercury being used for the backs of mirrors. But it is simply the thermometer that explodes, and it spoils the rest of the experiment. And I then go off onto a individual in the process described. That is what happens in this poem, which I'm afraid is slightly tiresome to listen to, really, because it is so full of it is so tricksy. But if you grant that is the broad intention, and that the human mind cannot be prevented from working like this, is what it is celebrating, though with regret, so to speak. I think it is sufficiently intelligible to sympathize with. I always think it's asking a good deal of an audience to stand listening to Bacchus, but however it is, as I say, quite brief. The laughing god born of a startling answer, symbol of clash in the divided glancer, forcing from heavens the symbol of clash in the divided glancer, forcing from heavens the force of earth's desire, captor it taught to sublime earth by fire, and starred round within man its sultan glitter. Round goblet, but for star or world map fitter, earth lost in him is still but earth fulfilled. Troubled the water till the spirit stilled, and flowered round tears of wine round the dimmed flask. The roundest ones crack least under this task. It is the delicate glass stands heat better than stone. This is the vessel could have stood alone were it not fitted both to earth and sky, which trickled to a sea though wit was dry, making a brew thicker than blood, being brine, being the mother water which was first made blood, all living blood, and whatever blood makes wine. The god architect, whose coping with the flood grind the white stallion arches of the main, and minor deeps that in the dome of the brain take iris arches, pupillage and word, walked on the bucking water like a bird, and guard went round its rampart and its ball. Columbus' egg sat on earth's garden wall, and held the equitation of his bar. Waves beat his bounds until he foamed a star, and mapped with fire the skyline that he ploughed. Trod and divined the enwheeling serene cloud, and who knows if Narcissus, dumb and bent, shed and fermented to a firmament, may use his pool as mirror to the skies, blind Hera's revelation peacock eyes. Before and behind trophies the golden throne may still be planted on. Incestuous chaos will breed permanent. Held to earth's centre, Ixion at the wheel, he boxed the compassing of her appeal. Her centaur born thence schooled this hero, the paunched beaker ether cooled, still makes go round the world-fooled clouded wheel. The god who fled down with a standard yard, surveying with that reed which was his god, he showed to John the New Jerusalem. It was a sugar cane containing rum, and hence the fire on which these works depend. Taut and quivered, strung upon the bend, an outmost crystal, a recumbent flame. He drinks all cups the tyrant could acclaim. He still is dumb, illimitably wind, burns still his nose and liver for mankind. It is an ether, such an agony. In the thin choking air of Caucasus, he under operation lies forever, smelling the chlorine and the chloroform. The plains around him flood with the destroyers, pasturing the stallions and the standing corn. The herm whose length measured degrees of heat, small lyre that sunned itself in Mercury, and perked one word there that made space ends meet, fluttered his snake too lightly into sea, most fertile thief and journal to inquire, the mortal Eden forming and the fire. A smash resounding in its constancy, this burst the planet Bacchus in the sky. Thence dry lone asteroids took heart to be. So soon the amalgam with Mercury. This plumbing, given with it free the house not built with hands, the silver crucible but armed, the sovereigns, eats into flaked sloughs. Paste for the backs of mirrors there he lies. Leper scales fall always from his eyes. She whom the god had snatched into a cloud came up my stair and called to me across the gulf she floated over of despair. Came roaring up as through triumphal arches, called I should warm my hands on her gold cup, called her despair the coping of her fire. The god in making fire from her despair cast from the parabola of falling arches an arch that cast his focus to the skyline, cold focus burning from the other's fire, Arachne sailing her own rope of cloud, a tracer photon with a rocket's lifeline, and purged his path with a thin fan of fire. Round steel behind the lights of the god's car, a wheel of fire that span her head across, borne soaring forward through a crowd of cloud, robed in fire round as heaven's cope, the god had lit up her despair to fire, fire behind grates of a part of her despair, and rang like bells the vaults and the dark arches.